All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a question that, let's be honest, is on pretty much everyone's mind. Are we actually heading towards World War III? Now, to get some answers, we're not just going to look at today's headlines. Instead, we're going to dig into history to find clues that might just help us make sense of our pretty turbulent present.
Now, to be clear, this isn't about getting out a crystal ball and predicting the future. No way. What we're going to do is explore some of the, dangerous patterns and historical echoes that are popping up again all over the globe. The goal here is really to connect the dots, not to, forecast some unavoidable destiny.
So let's just dive right in. We're going to use this really powerful idea as our guide. You've probably heard it before. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And that's what we're going to be doing. Listening for those rhymes across 4 really key areas to see what they can tell us about what's happening right now.
Okay, so first up, we're going to look at 4 critical dimensions of life: the social, the economic, the political, and of course, the military. And what we'll do is compare the times right before World War I and World War II to today. Let's see how the patterns line up, shall we?
Just look at the parallels here. It's kind of wild, right? You had the Industrial Revolution back then and the digital revolution today. Both brought absolutely incredible progress. But, and this is the key, they also unleashed this wave of social anxiety. And what history tells us is that when people feel insecure and uprooted like that, society as a whole becomes way more vulnerable to extreme ideology.
You know, we always hear this idea that countries that trade a lot with each other won't go to war, right? But history gives us a pretty stark warning here. Before World War I, Britain and Germany were huge trading partners. It didn't stop the war. And now, today, when you see nations like the US and China moving towards self-sufficiency, it's a reminder that fear and this raw pursuit of power can just completely steamroll what seems like economic common sense. Okay, this next pattern, political polarization, is absolutely critical. Before both world wars, you saw societies get so divided, so polarized, that violence just became another political tool. I mean, you can see it right here, the clashes from the past and the conflicts of today. When that middle ground completely disappears, the risk of a total collapse just skyrockets. And today, man, that historical rhyme is getting really, really loud.
And this isn't just happening in one place. Look at this number: over 10,000 attacks on politicians in Germany in just the last 5 years. That's not an isolated incident. It shows a massive, widespread surge in political violence across some of the most established democracies in the world. This is exactly what happens when compromise becomes impossible. That risk of collapse just keeps growing.
So, how do local conflicts blow up into global ones? Alliances. And this is where that historical rhyme starts to get genuinely scary. If you look here, the Axis powers in the 1930s, they were actually pretty loosely aligned. I mean, Germany was helping China fight Japan all the way up to 1938. But today, the so-called axis of dictatorships, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, is way more integrated. They're deeply interconnected, especially economically. That is a huge critical difference.
Okay, so if history is rhyming, what makes today's world so different, so uniquely complex? Well, the answer is that we're basically living in a world with not 1, not 2, but 3 different global orders all layered on top of each other, all at the same time.
First up, let's talk security. On that front, it's still pretty much a unipolar world. The United States is really the only country that has the military power to project its force into literally every corner of the globe. And its allies, in Europe and Asia, they fundamentally depend on that American security umbrella.
But then you look at the economy, and the game board looks totally different. It's multipolar. Yeah, the US is a huge player, but so are China, the EU, India, and Japan. In the economic arena, power is shared. There's no single country that gets to dictate all the rules anymore. And then there's the newest layer, and honestly, the most disruptive one, the digital world. And here, the most powerful players, they're not even countries. They're the giant tech companies that build and control the entire global infrastructure that we all live on.
So this is where our historical parallels really start to break down a bit, because a totally new set of actors has just walked onto the world stage. I'm talking about tech companies. And they now have a kind of geopolitical power that, until like 5 minutes ago, was something only countries had.
I mean, their influence is just staggering. Really think about it for a second. Tech companies were the ones who kept Ukraine online after the Russian invasion. They get to decide which political leaders get a global megaphone and which ones get silenced. Their platforms can fuel disinformation that leads to actual real-world insurrections. And their algorithms,
They aren't just shaping what we see online. They are literally shaping who we become.
And this quote just nails it. It perfectly captures this massive shift in power. It used to be all about nature versus nurture, but now you have to add a third thing to that list: algorithm. The code being written in Silicon Valley now has just as much influence on our lives as our DNA or how we were raised. That is a truly radical change.
So, where does all this go from here? Well, it looks like there are three potential futures ahead of us. One is a tech Cold War, where the digital world basically splits in two. Another is a new kind of digital globalization, where these companies are competing directly with nation-states for influence. Or, and this is the big one, a technopolar order, where tech companies actually become the most powerful actors on the planet. The stakes really could not be higher.
All right, so let's tie this all together. What's the big takeaway? Basically, we've got all these destabilizing patterns from the past, all those dangerous historical rhymes we talked about, and they're all playing out in a totally new, completely fragmented global arena.
And the really crucial point is this. All those old, familiar dangers, nationalism, polarization, alliances spiraling out of control, they're now being amplified and made way more complicated by these new digital tools. And here's the kicker. These tools are controlled by companies, not governments, who are accountable to pretty much nobody except their shareholders.
And that leaves us with the biggest question of all, doesn't it? As history's dangerous rhymes get louder and louder, and as these new, incredibly powerful digital tools continue to reshape our world, who's ultimately responsible for what happens next? Who is going to make sure that these new forms of power don't end up pushing us all right over the edge?